Here with us today for a program we're calling Dispelling the Myths about Net Zero and Passive House Buildings. I will tell you right now that both I and our presenters were a little skeptical when we talked about doing this idea and doing this presentation in the middle of August. But you surprised us. There are at least 75 people who registered, and there's a lot of interest in this topic. So I'm really looking forward to it and to hearing the presentation, and grateful to all of you for joining us today. Do say hello in the chat function that let us know who you are. Our thanks before we get started to Cambridge Trust, NBC 10, and InSource Services, who are the sponsors of our Environment Series programming, which this is one of them. And without further ado, I'd love to get started in our program. Tell you briefly, we will have a presentation from our two presenters. We'll hear a little bit after that from Kent Gonzalez and Northland to talk about their own experience with this concept of passive house and net zero and how they've been thinking about it, and then have time for your questions. So our presenters this morning, Beverly Craig is the Senior Program Manager at the Mass Clean Energy Center, coordinating programs such as the Passive House Design Challenge for affordable housing. And Jonathan Cantor is Principal at Sage Builders. He's also active with the Newton Energy Commission and Design Review Committee. He's a certified passive house builder. Has been working in the field for 30 years, and he even once won a Chamber Green Business Award presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Beverly. Thank you both, to you and Jonathan, for your time this morning, and really look forward to hearing about this program. And
hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And are you guys seeing my screen right now? Or do I need to share it still?
we are seeing it, but we're seeing your side view as well. So you want to switch it to presentation view if you can.
Any better? No?
We can go with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this morning. Just want to sort of set the table a little bit about how fast the high performance building market is moving. So 5 years ago in Massachusetts, there was really only one certified multifamily passive house building in the state. And today there are 63 that are either in the final stages of certification or in construction, and 110 buildings, which are about 8,000 total units that we expect in the next 2 to 3 years to be certifying to the passive house standard. And in the single family market, 5 years ago, you just really didn't see that many net zero homes. But today, like all the architects and builders who are in this high performance market, building net zero new construction homes are super busy. And we even have people like Jonathan Cantor who are doing renovations and additions to get to retrofit homes to net zero. So huge change in the market. So today we just want to talk a little bit about why this market's changing so fast, but also what are some of the common things we hear that are misperceptions, and sort of talk about that. So I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan.
Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to see so many people here and such a great interest in this topic. I've been working in this high performance field for probably most of my career, 30 years or more. And, passive house, what is passive house? Passive house is a metric that has been developed and evolved over the past several decades that really allows us to optimize the costs of improvements with the energy savings and other attributes such as better indoor air quality, increased durability, and of course, energy savings, which means less greenhouse gas emissions, very important. And we're going to talk about that a little more as we go through our slides. So a few other definitions. Thank you, Bev, for advancing the slide there. Net zero, what does that mean? In generally, when I'm talking about it anyways, we're talking about the ability of a building to generate enough electricity, enough energy during the year to satisfy the annual demands from that same building. And usually we always are using renewables to generate that, usually solar PV on a roof. And these buildings have no fossil fuels, so they're all electric. And occasionally in the depths of winter, it might need additional electricity that can't produce to heat the house, but it makes up for it in the summer by generating more energy than it can use, and results in net zero or better over the year. Next slide. So this is an example of what I consider to be a model home. It probably uses 40 to 60% less energy than a house built to the stretch code today. It was a renovation. We did add the second floor in addition in the back that you can't see, and the solar's on the back where it faces south. But this is a very typical New England home that is not super fancy. It's super efficient energy-wise, but also how it allows people to live in the house. It's all electric. It was easy to build. It was built by a construction crew that had never done anything high performance before. It's all off-the-shelf items, not particularly expensive. And it really, with our attention to detail, our attention to the air barrier and the thermal barrier, we were really able to create a very comfortable, affordable, attractive, and durable home that uses very little energy, and also are sensitive to embodied carbon, which is also extremely important. Let's go to the next slide, please. And not only can we do high performance in single family situations, but we can certainly do it in multifamily and in multifamily retrofits, where the benefits only increase. We continue to see great quiet interiors, excellent indoor air quality, very resilient. Since these buildings are so well insulated and air sealed, they don't need much energy to change the temperature or just keep the temperature stable. And so when the power goes out, they just sort of coast, and they can go for several days without really needing too much more power to stay comfortable, or at least stay safe. And the increased durability is a major factor, I think, in making passive house a building standard that people are looking at seriously and using. Because there's so much attention to detail, because there's such a significant, robust verification process, things are put together correctly. Water's managed well, vapor's managed well, and it eliminates a lot of the deterioration that we come to expect in many of our buildings without wasting a lot of energy. And in fact, these buildings that are passive house or close to passive house do achieve 40 to 60% less energy use than a stretch code building. And that's been proved out by the data, as Bev will go into in a little bit. Next slide. Another myth, and I don't really like to use these words myths. Really, these are the great attributes of the passive house standard. Is buildings can be very attractive. There's a lot of different varieties and types of designs that one could do. There's no prescription as to the number or quantity of glazing. You can really do modern stuff. You can do very traditional stuff. Here you see a range. Sometimes you see the solar PV, sometimes you don't. Of course, it depends on the orientation of the building, but also the type of roof style that you use. And here you can see, very nice homes. Some on the expensive side, some less so, but they're all net zero or better. And chances are they can power your vehicles as we move forward. Next slide. here again, some more examples. Bottom left, you can see a historic brownstone in Boston, probably, and you can't tell which unit is the passive house unit. And similarly, more different design options that we see above and on the sides. Bev, you want to talk about these multifamily units?
Yeah, sure. So in the multifamily space, it's very similar to what Jonathan's talking about. You look at these buildings, you don't necessarily know that they are passive house. You see a lot of different variety of styles. So the one on the upper left is in Gloucester, that's 30 units. And it's a little hard to tell from the picture, but from the street side, it really blends in great to Main Street. I actually walked to the ribbon cutting and walked right past it because I didn't realize that was the building we were going to. You can have super modern, the lower left in Northampton, look at very, like a craftsman style look. And even, larger windows. Some people tend to think you can't have big windows. I think Kent will show you how in Northland, they're actually using pretty large windows. So another sort of misperception that we hear is that this is super, super expensive. And, while I think back 5 years ago, when I first came to the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, we were hearing about a lot of passive house in the multifamily space, especially in affordable housing in Pennsylvania and New York, and some even in Maine, honestly, where people were saying, oh, it's not that much more expensive. But when we started talking to the affordable housing community, especially the tax credit agencies here, they were like, no, we think it'll be 10, 15% more expensive. And we were like, well, that doesn't seem consistent with what we've heard elsewhere. Why don't we fund some of these, get some people doing this and really track closely and see if that holds up or not. And at least we'll get a bunch of people who know how to do this, if nothing else. And here are 7 projects that have been funded through Mass EC with a higher incentive and asked to track incremental costs very closely. So we're definitely below 5% here. The average so far that's come in is about 2.4%. I mean, that's not an exact number, and percentages aren't a really useful way to look at costs here. The point is that in the realm of projects this big, we're not talking about something that is enormous. We're talking about something that if you go for it, you could probably fit it in. We're in the range of what gets engineered out towards the end. And honestly, a lot of the general contractors who worked on some of these projects say that site conditions are way more important, or like the details that the architect is putting in, than the fact that they're going to passive house. Another misconception we sometimes hear is that you may go through all this and it's not going to really save that much more energy, and that is not true. I think part of the reason people hear that or might think that is sort of the experience of LEED. And I'm a LEED accredited professional. I think LEED is fantastic, but it focuses on 7 different areas. Only one of those is energy performance. Only 30% of points in a LEED project have to do at all with energy. And so I think people who've seen LEED buildings get built expect them to be really energy efficient, but that's not always true. And that is not true with the passive house certification. So remember I said 5 years ago, there was only one passive house multifamily in the state? Well, it's in Boston. It's this picture in the upper right here. And now that communities like Boston are requiring energy disclosure for buildings, you can actually look and see, hey, well, how well does this one perform compared to everything else? So in this chart, this is just downloaded from the Boston website. The green on the left is how much energy per square foot is that building in that picture using, this passive house certified building. And when you look at all the LEED ones in purple that are certified and the code ones, on average, you're talking about more than half, like more on the 60% side of energy savings compared to the norm. We see that in Philadelphia as well. And I think it's really interesting here is these are all affordable housing projects. The green, again, those 3 projects, look how tightly clustered those are. When you have a passive house certification, there's a lot of verification to make sure that how it's designed is how it's built. Whereas in the LEED and the code, you see a lot of variance. And, honestly, people can always aim for net zero and have no certifications at all, but having the passive house like protocol, and especially the construction verification, means you're going to get what you design. And I think this is the perfect experiment in New Hampshire. This is an affordable housing development. The same owner basically built the same number of units in the same configuration, 8 years apart, one lead, one passive house, and 49% difference in the energy use. And this is with the same architect, the same building manager, everything's the same. So another misconception we often hear is, well, how the heck do I do this? Like, nobody's out there to help. And that is not true. There's like amazing programs. And part of why we want to talk about this today is make sure you guys take advantage of this and if you're in these fields. So the Mass Save program, almost 3 years ago now, started offering this program. It's an incentive for multifamily above 5 units. And the nice thing about it is it provides some upfront help when you're designing the building. So they provide up to $5,000 for a feasibility study for you to sort of talk to your design team and figure out what would have to change to bring the building that you're thinking about designing to passive house standards. They also pay for 75% of the costs, up to $20,000 for modeling that's very specific to passive house. It's much more sophisticated than what you usually get for energy modeling. And then finally, they'll pay $3,000 per unit to actually certify. Some of that comes at the time of putting the plans together, and some of it comes at the very end. There's also in the single family realm, more and more incentives. And this is what's actually out there right now. There's a lot more coming, I think, in the next couple of years. But one of them is new construction homes. There is an all-electric home incentive for very high performance buildings. I hear it's very generous. It's something anyone looking into building a new construction home should think about looking at. And then for existing buildings, thinking of retrofitting, there is now this $10,000 whole home heat pump incentive. I would encourage anyone that takes a look at that incentive to not just try and switch out their fossil fuel equipment to heat pumps, but also really look at improving your envelope as much as possible with any renovation or additions that are being done. Another thing that's super helpful, and this is not just for the builders of the world, any companies in Massachusetts that are under 100 employees are eligible for what's called the Express program that Commonwealth offers. And Built Environment Plus has done a great job of sort of teasing out the ones that are very green building oriented. But if your company's in this field, and this is like honestly a nice benefit when you would like to give people a raise but you can't afford that, give them training, get them certifications for free. So all the passive house ones are there, lead ones are there. There's some very specific to construction, and this one's also available. This is actually hands-on, so perfect for a general contractor, for subs. It's offered, it's a half-day workshop once a week for 6 weeks, and you actually build all this stuff. So you can sort of see what are the details that you need to pay attention to. And that Express program, companies under 100 can get $30,000 of training each year for their employees. So take advantage of it. If you don't know about it, feel free to give me a call and I can put you in touch with the right people. And so like all these projects that are going on, we've learned some things. And I'm just gonna give you a few high level ones. If you ever show up at like a Passive House Massachusetts meeting or look at the tons of webinars that are out there, there's way more than just this. But the high level advice that I think we've learned is the more experience that you've got on your team with this high performance work and the more like certifications and education your team has, the easier it's gonna go and the less expensive it's gonna go. And if you already have a team together for building something, but they don't have this education, really, really encourage them to get it. Even if they're not going to even go to Passive House, this is information that's useful, that's going to be needed for the energy codes that are rolling out anyway. So encourage people to use it. Jonathan made reference to this, that construction verification is really important. So many architects are frustrated with the fact that things don't get built the way they design them. The nice thing about Passive House and any construction verification is people are in the field checking to make sure the insulation is continuous, that the air barriers are there, they're doing blower door after blower door. So can't emphasize enough that that construction verification is super, super important. And the other thing we've learned is the more you do this, the easier it gets. So the first time there's a lot of learning to be done, but it just becomes sort of normal business practice after you've seen it and done it once.
I'll just add to what you just said, Bev. And verification is more than just looking at something after the fact and seeing what's there. It really has a big training component, and it will depend on both the verifier as well as the crew that they're working with. But it often entails more like commissioning, where before a process is started, the team reviews what is expected and how to do it, and what the materials are, and then there's a process for getting to completion, and then of course there's the final verification at the end. But it's really a way to get everybody on board and make sure it's happening correctly, because there's no way to inspect every single detail in the job.
Yeah, totally agree. And we noticed there were a lot of real estate agents and realtors signed up for this. So I threw this slide in there as well. Continuing education for your license. There's a lot of really relevant stuff. So Mass CC has actually paid for several of these courses to be developed. One being Selling the Sun. So if you're looking at a property and listing it that has solar, this is a fantastic class to take, so that you sort of know all the different variations with condos and like how these different things deal with. One of the real experts in this field of the real estate sales side is Craig Foley, who, again, we'd love to put you in touch with if you're interested in sort of this subset of the market, energy efficient and net zero homes. Yeah,
also Craig has actually pioneered and led the development of a addendum to standard appraisals that takes into account the value added by high performance features in a building. And he worked with me on a project, E+ project I did in Boston. And we had 4 units that were sold as condos, and we beat the market by 20%. And largely, I believe, due to the fact that we were able to sell that high performance feature. People realized the value of the better quality homes, the verification that went on, and just the details that were considered in the process of building the houses. So I really think there's added value here, and Craig has done an excellent job at realizing that value.
Yeah, and I just encourage any of you who are interested in this stuff and want to reach out to Jonathan or I. We're really happy to answer questions and connect you with a lot of these resources. And thanks for joining.
Great. Thank you, Beverly and Jonathan. And we're also going to take your questions here in a minute. You can put them in the Q&A, or especially if you have a technical one you want to ask in person, then just raise your hand and we'll let you ask your question in person. So raise your hand if you want to do it that way, or put it in the Q&A and we'll do that. But before we start with your questions, I wanted to bring in Ken Gonzalez, who's Vice President at Northland Development Investment Corp., who, as we know, is building a major project along Needham Street in Newton. And Kent, I would love to hear a little bit about your own kind of experience, Northland's experience with Passive House, because when you started developing this project, I know you weren't thinking about it, and then you were approached by Jonathan and others and had some kind of change of thoughts. So maybe you could just tell us about what your journey's been like on this.
Sure. Before we started this process, when we first met with Jonathan and Bev and Dan Rubin and the rest of the folks at Green Newton, we believed all these myths. We thought we didn't want to have anything to do with Passive House. It was way too expensive. It was certainly ugly. There's no question about that for what we wanted to build. Nobody knew how to build it. However, once we started meeting with Bev and the crew, they like to say they made us do this, but we like to say that they brought us along. They educated us, they helped us learn about it. And part of the process up through our special permit, we're building 14 buildings on the site, and 3 of them were required to be Passive House. And as part of our journey, learning more and more about Passive House, right now, all but 4 buildings will be passive house. So we not only, learned as much as we could about it, we've fully embraced it for all of the anti-myths that we just went over today. If you can see the buildings behind me, those are all passive house buildings. The environments that we're creating for our residents will be far superior to anything that's on the market now. As a matter of fact, the project that we're building, we've embraced it so strongly that we're considered the largest market rate, all electric, passive house project. Our consultant likes to say in the world, because they do work internationally, but we're just going to say we're the biggest in the United States for now. Certainly the biggest in Newton, but certainly, and so, we believe in it. We know what it'll do on a long-term basis. The energy savings, typically we would bill our tenants, or the tenants would be on their own meters for their heating and air conditioning. But because of the type of system that we're putting in these buildings, a centralized system, which made the delivery of energy much more efficient, we're able to include that in their rent because the energy costs are so low. Just as Beverly said, anywhere from 40 to almost over 60% less than what you would see in a baseline building. And almost all of this talk, honestly, from what we're seeing and what we're seeing across the country, is almost not, we shouldn't even be talking about worrying about it being too expensive. It's really embracing it because of what it does bring to the community, but the energy code is driving us this direction. One of the things that Passive House allowed us to do is put more glass in the units. We typically, the energy code right now, I believe, allows a 28% window to wall ratio without further interventions, mitigation, like what we're incorporating. So I think our lowest window to wall ratio is around 38%. Our highest is in the 40s, the building behind me with all of the glass. That's not only a passive house building, but it's also a mass timber CLT building. So an incredibly sustainable building. So if you really are trying to do what has to be done for climate resiliency, passive house is certainly probably the key strategy to achieve it. And buildings that are being built just to the energy code, I feel, will be sort of the albatrosses of the future because people won't want to live in them because they're sucking so much energy out of the environment. So that's my story. Sticking to it.
So thank you for that, Ken. I guess my question for you, and then maybe for the other presenters, is your Northland project's 900 units, big scale project. Does that same kind of, say it again?
800.
800, I'm saying 900, okay. Does that same thing apply to somebody who's doing a smaller scale project, or what the economics of it and the feasibility?
Well, I think it depends. For us, it depends on the size of the building. Like I said, we have 4 buildings that are not passive house, but they are LEED for homes. So they're being built to the same passive house standards. But because for our experience and from our team, and I know Jonathan and Ev will probably disagree with us, but we felt that the LEED for homes approach and still employing passive house standards would allow us to, those buildings will still be served just like the other ones, central systems. So we're making sure that they're built to a high performance standard, but not to passive house. But they'll still be incredibly efficient. So for us, we wouldn't do anything less than probably 4 stories and 25, 30 units, depending on the building. I mean, everything depends. There's no hard and fast in all of this. That's the other thing. You know, like Bev so aptly illustrated, it really depends on the type of building, what the costs will be. But you're using a different product. You're using consultants you wouldn't typically use in a baseline project. So it's definitely going to be expensive, but it's more expensive. But as Bev said, not as much as you think. But what you create at the other end is what's really important.
Also, I think when you're talking about cost, you know, we encourage folks to look at life cycle cost, and you know, someone has to pay the cost of these buildings, both initially as well as to operate them. And if you're experiencing a significant price increases in fuels from time to time, or perhaps continually over time, you know, this is a way to reduce your budget allocation to energy. and make that a much more minor part of your operation. And there's a real benefit there. And of course, the durability is a big factor. It costs tons of money to maintain buildings. And if they're not built well to begin with, if they're not specified carefully, as the passive house metric offers, then you'll be paying more for the ongoing maintenance. So there's a number of costs to consider beyond the initial first cost. And as Bev's initial data suggests, that initial cost is really quite small. And that you have to also remember that those buildings were among the first in the state to really embrace passive house at scale. And all those designers and contractors who are involved in those buildings are now much more experienced and educated, and will bring that to bear on their next projects. And the manufacturers, of course, are also responding with products that are designed to be utilized in passive house applications. They come with better instructions. And just like with the stretch code, the manufacturers responded to the need and delivered products that if you just follow the directions, you'll get, you'll meet the stretch code requirements. So too with passive house, I think, as these products are developed and the instructions of how to install them are put forward and people are trained, the certification process will almost be as automatic as the HERS rating process is currently for the stretch codes. So I really think that this is the path of the future, and that the costs will be insignificant.
So help me, I'm sorry, go ahead, Bev.
One more thing to add is Boston has this already. They have BERDO, which started as energy disclosure and now is sort of a building's emission standard. So it's basically ratcheting down what emissions you could have on buildings. If you're building something new and you're in a community that might eventually get a buildings emission standard, it's so much cheaper to build it right the first time than to retrofit it in 10 or 15 years. And Newton's definitely looking at this. Greg might know other communities in the Chambers area that might be interested in this, but even the climate law or the energy bill that the governor didn't just sign today had reporting requirements statewide for all buildings over 20,000 square feet. So if you're building something over 20,000 square feet, I'd say there's a good chance you're gonna eventually have to deal with that. So think about building it right the first time. So there was a question about why some of the smaller buildings in Northland aren't going for passive. And I will say, like, at least in theory, the bigger the building is, the less the incremental cost should be, because you have less surface area, right? Like less area to the outside. So, I don't usually encourage people under 10 units to go through the whole passive house incentive, even though it goes down to 5 units if you're interested. And honestly, like, why not take the design money up front from Mass Save, even if you decide not to go passive house? It'll probably lead to your architects getting more educated, is my guess. But 10 and above, I think people should look at it closely. Whether they do it or not is a different thing. And I think Ken can probably speak more directly to that.
Yeah, your point's exactly right. The problem we had when we looked at those buildings, they're 12 units, they're 3 stories, is that they were just too small to get the efficiencies. But passive house isn't the only high performance system out there. So we are still able to implement passive house standards in the wall details. But then in addition, incorporating LEED for homes requirements for individual unit compartmentalization to make sure that they are individually sealed and airtight, and then using the same VRF type system that we're using in the other buildings. So we're confident that they'll perform just as well and just as just like they're supposed to, like the other buildings. So
Bev, I wasn't quite sure I was following when you talked about that smaller under 10 unit buildings maybe not being the sweet spot for this stuff, or really working?
Well, I think for actual certification, I think what Kent is saying is like heading for the right wall assembly and avoiding the right air infiltration is all right. But like, so some people are scared by passive house because it's pass fail. Like LEED's a little different, right? Like, so say you're aiming for gold and you don't quite make all your points, you can go to silver, right? Like this doesn't have it, it's pass fail. Although I've got to say the incentive that Mass Save has designed is wonderful, because if you try and you don't quite get there, you still get double the new construction incentive for above code buildings. So there's a nice soft landing if you don't make it. So I guess that's why I'm saying to under 10, like you have to see what the numbers are. I just wouldn't, it's not a slam dunk for me necessarily.
Okay, and then Jonathan, explain how that translates to single family homes.
Well, I think in terms of single family homes, you know, the passive house provides a metric. And as Ken pointed out, there are other metrics, and there's certainly each one has some pros to it, and compartmentalization, the ability to use a central system. You know, those may be very good choices, and I think they are very good choices. And so passive house just doesn't address that well. And so they have some room for improvement there. But if you're looking for a metric overall to use as your guideline, that I would still use the passive house. And I would try to get to net zero for sure, make it all electric. And to be successful in this, you need the verification process. And passive house provides the rigor to sort of force you to get there. Once you're experienced, you probably can do it. You know, a small builder can probably do it themselves, or with a couple of good consultants do it themselves, and not necessarily need the certification to prove on a piece of paper that you got there, because they'll know what they're doing, and they'll do the verification along the way so that they ensure they get there, and they'll end up with a home that works perfect. So I
Jonathan,
think,
what HERS rating would you say that's equivalent to? Because people sort of in the single family world know that.
right. So, you know, a HERS scale goes from 0 to 100, 100 being sort of, I think it was a 1996 typical home or something like that. And of course, in this area, older homes are around 130, 140, even higher. And it's a golf score, so you want lower is better. So 0 is a net zero home. And passive house is probably in the mid 20s to the low 30s. And you really need to be net zero, you really need to be below a 40. It's tough to put enough solar on your roof if your HERS score is above 40 in general.
Do municipal building inspectors and anybody else who's in that sort of approval chain, do they understand how to cope with this, how to deal with this stuff, how to evaluate it?
Well, I think they rely on the third-party reviews, you know, HERS raters to do the HERS ratings, just as they do structural engineering or civil engineering to a large extent. You know, transportation, you know, there's experts that are hired either by the developer or the home builder, and I think that's what they rely on. I think their familiarity with these programs is increasing, just as all of ours are, as they attend workshops like this and you know, other training programs offered by the state for their inspectors licenses.
So someone else asked this question, but I was wondering too, and all the renderings you showed, including the pictures behind them, none of them show a window being open. Is this where we talk about sealed windows like we're used to in office buildings and wish we could open our windows? And
not in any of the residential projects.
Yeah.
They're usually all open.
Yeah.
Now, passive house has yes, you do require operable windows. However, the building code over a certain height allows, like in our buildings, you can't open them more than 4 inches, but they're still operable. Some of the buildings have Juliet balconies or other balcony doors, so you can open those too.
But windows are one of the big differences. Almost all of them in our climate are going to, except probably the very biggest buildings, are going to need triple glazed windows to get to passive house. So that's a big difference. Most Americans are not used to triple glazed windows, even though they're very common in Europe. And they used to be very expensive, to get in the US, I've got to say costs have come way, way down. So for the
Well,
acre.
easy.
Okay. Well, relatively. There's still an incremental cost, no doubt. But comfort, oh wow. And even if you're going to go with a double glazed in a single family home, I would really encourage people to look at not double hunks. So there are many other types of windows that don't have nearly the same air infiltration. You know, maybe Jonathan could speak to windows a little.
Sure. I mean, the market keeps changing rapidly. So, what I say now can change very quickly. But all the manufacturers now have triple glazed windows. They're looking at thin glass where the windows get lighter and they can add more window panes to the assembly. They're looking at different glazings, different tints that they can put on the windows, emulsions that they can put on the glass to allow good energy from the sun to come through when you want it to and not when you don't. So there's a lot of improvements that are happening, and it really depends exactly on which windows you're looking at. You can get really good triple pane or better windows with R9 for residential that are cheaper than many of the Marvin products, for example. And Pella may not even offer something comparable, and in fact, Marvin won't either. But it's a big discussion, windows. But there really are lots of good choices at many different price points. The E+ project I did in Boston had triple pane, double hung windows from Harvey Industries that were, I think, under $500 a unit, which is pretty cheap these days.
Another question, are there elements of this that can be retrofit into buildings that are undergoing significant renovation?
Absolutely.
Jonathan's the expert.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an opportunist when it comes to renovations. And when I see a renovation, I see an opportunity to improve its energy performance. And if someone says, oh, we want to change our siding and we want to change our windows, of course, I'm thinking new R9 windows and 4 inches of polyiso on the exterior of the building shell. But it doesn't have to be 4 inches. It could be less. The most important thing in a residence and probably in a commercial building is air infiltration. So when you're stripping a building, now you have a chance to put on a layer of air infiltration material, whether it's a membrane or a panel or some kind of a sheet that you put over things. And it's really a great opportunity to do that kind of thing. And there's good money to help with that. MassSave has lots of insulation and air sealing options that can be very helpful.
And the $10,000 heat pump incentive.
Yeah.
I would say the normal watch for the renovations and additions program to become much more generous is what I would tell people. There is a MassSave when you're doing a renovation up to $10,000 incentive, and you can right now you can't add it to that 10 grand heat pump thing, but I think that will change. So like if you could get 20,000 towards an energy retrofit, it would let you go a lot more in depth for envelope improvements.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly takes care of some marginal cost between what you might consider as a baseline and what would be sort of over and above.
Okay, we'll take your questions either through Q&A or if you want to raise your hand. Larry Feld, if you're there, I saw that you had a question, you raised your hand. I'm not sure you're ready to talk, but if you are, we'd love to hear from you. There you go. Good morning, Larry. Oh, you're muted, Larry, or something.
I wonder if Maxine, if it's
Well,
he had written in the chat or the Q&A the names of, wondering what the names are, the 4 passive house multifamilies that Bev, you showed in your example.
sure.
Is that something you can share?
Yeah. Well, I would say the easiest way to see everything in Massachusetts is to go to well, not everything. If you go to the PHIUS, Passive House International, let's see, PH Institute of the United States, so PHIUS. Maybe Jonathan, do you mind throwing it in the chat? If you go to their
Yeah.
project database and search for Massachusetts, you can see all the ones that are under construction and certified. So the first one, the picture that I showed you in Boston is called, oh goodness, I'm having a brain freeze.
The distillery.
Yes, Distillery North. That's I think 28 units. Then Cambridge Finch in Cambridge is 98 units. Harbor Village is 30 units in Gloucester. There's 130 unit one in Mattapan that's extremely close to occupancy right now and certification. There's like a good 10 that are like move-in ready. And then there's a lot that are under construction.
Great.
And one thing I will mention, we didn't mention, except sort of like a little bit on the side, one of the bigger incremental costs is that the Passive House standard requires a much better ventilation system than code requires. So in multifamily, you can have one supply of fresh air to a unit. In Passive House, you have to have it in all the occupied spaces. So all the bedrooms are going to get fresh air. So that is actually one of the bigger incremental costs. But I got to say, after COVID, like multifamily really should be doing this anyway. Don't we know this, right? So anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
Great, thank you. So we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to ask you panelists to try to keep the answers as concise as you can, but we'll rip through as many as we can in the last 10 minutes. In New England, what's a bigger driver of energy use? Cooling in the summer or heating in the winter?
Heating.
Still, may not be
Okay.
true in 20 years.
Bev offered specific examples of Passive House cost premium. How are the costs calculated? For example, are the percentage of the construction cost or project cost? How is the cost calculated, including the life cycle of a certain period of time?
So it's just pure construction costs plus consultant, like your green consultants that you would have. And all those were projects that had been bid to 80% drawings. And so it was really easy to track the change orders, right, from the original costs. So Mass CEC, if you just Google Mass CEC Passive House, we have some very detailed one. Finch, you can actually see every change order. It's sort of interesting.
Terrific. And actually, I don't know what this question means. Are you using PHI or PHIUS?
Northland's
Chance to
using,
go.
yeah, we're using Passive House International, which is PHI for Northland. And remember, these are decisions that were made yesterday.
Right.
These are decisions that were made years ago to drive the design. So at that time, PHIUS was in the process of changing it.
Yeah. They're both good. There's pluses and minuses, especially with certain building types, depending. I mean, that's what the feasibility study money from Mass Save is supposed to help you figure out, is which would be the better way for your building to go.
Okay. We see a number of startup companies with innovative building envelope, energy efficiency, building data technology. What kind of validation certification do these companies need before architects and builders will adopt new systems, services, or products?
I would say there's really, I think PHI does certify products.
Right.
At least historically, PHIUS didn't.
PHIUS does now.
Oh, it does. Okay.
Yeah.
But I would say anything innovative building envelope wise, talk to Greentown Labs, talk to Mass CEC actually has business incubation money and help for like university research to be prototyped into Massachusetts products and to grow those businesses. So feel free to reach out to me. I can connect you to anybody for building up those ideas into marketable programs and marketable businesses.
And I think on the PHIUS US, PHIUS.org website, they have links to their process for recognizing and accrediting products for Passive House certification.
So here's a comment I just want to get your thoughts on. This is from Rick Lipoff, who, as you know, is a city council and chair of the land use committee and vice chair of the city council, vice president. As a legislator, I'd rather see Passive House and the greenest of buildings be the norm and not have to legislate or force the issue. Education through today's program are just what we need to accelerate the knowledge and make green buildings a reality from step one. But I'm going to allow you a chance to maybe make your pitch for why you think we need, or if we need legislative things, or if the private sector really can take care of this and is taking care of this.
I would say you need both. You know, the stretch code proved that having a legislative action really changed the market, because manufacturers responded, as I've already mentioned. And now if you build a house and you basically follow the directions, you'll get your HERS rating to meet the code requirements. So certainly doing it legislatively would be helpful, but we can't wait. You know, the politics sometimes takes longer than reality can afford. And, you know, that's why Green Newton started this building standards committee and reached out to developers like Kent several years ago. And, you know, we engaged in really an education process, both for them and for us as advocates. And what we found is, you know, it makes sense to build this way. I mean, I'm sure Kent's really happy that he made the decisions he has so far, because I think they're the right choice. But more realistically, they I'm sure found that the economics of the overall decision works for them as a business, and they chose passive house, or a combination of metrics, including passive house, that really worked for their development. So, well, you know, this is a great example of the private sector really leading the way and showing the legislative and political bodies that this is the future. And Newton's legislative process has responded, and we've seen in their special permit process, which is where they're allowed to control these things due to state law. We've seen in the special permit process, you know, these options like passive house and a certain level of LEED, although we don't think LEED provides the energy savings that is really necessary or makes it worthwhile for the developer.
Ken, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I think Jonathan's right. I think it is a combination. I mean, the energy code is eventually driving us this direction. If you look at the next versions, they're driving, and passive house is one of the alternative paths. It is now, and it will continue to be. But I think that you know, informed communities that are trying to push things along, the only thing I often worry about in certain communities is sometimes they're pushing so hard that sometimes they don't quite have it just right. I'm not saying that happened here, but in other communities that they may not understand the differences in the systems. I mean, we're totally engaged in all of this, and we've learned a lot about how to employ it and what's important and what's not. But I think, you know, the short answer is I think it's a combination, and I think, you know, Newton really sort of exhibits how through Green Newton in particular, and those informed folks, and Bev as the I like to call her the bouncer because she's the enforcer. So everybody listens to Bev and Green Newton. So, but no, honestly, I think it's a combination. It's just making sure as the legislation comes about that it's sometimes there are conflicting components that just have to be resolved, or there's not the right sort of support to administer it. So that's the other thing. But yeah, we're good. We feel like we're in some ways on the cutting edge in a lot of ways with this.
So you're the poster child for having done it without those regulations, right?
But right, I mean, it was made a requirement of our special permit, but we went above and beyond what our special permit required. You know, for instance, LEED, we are also employing LEED, but we're certifying our buildings as LEED. They're not certifiable; they will be certified. And you know, we're doing more buildings, passive house, than just the original 3. So,
great. Deb, thoughts on this?
You know, there's a limit to what cities can do right now because you can't prescribe passive house because of energy code. The proposed energy code is really moving fast towards the passive house standard for the larger buildings. So I think Kent's totally right. It's getting there. I did see something a question about commercial. And so their downtown Winthrop Towers is 30 stories of office building that are getting passive house certification. Commercial kitchens was a question. Yes, there are, in fact, there's 2 I know of in Newton that would have commercial kitchens that are talking about passive house. Mark Development on Craft Street is a senior living facility, so they have in-house kitchen, and that's a commercial kitchen. And then also, I think Sunrise might be interested along Route 9. They're still exploring it. So the incentive that's for passive house right now in Mass Save is just for residential units that have a kitchen. If we're talking senior or other categories, you can still go into Mass Save for the commercial program, new construction program, and they have a net zero pathway, which includes passive house incentives. I don't know, it's on a square foot basis as opposed to a unit basis, so it's a little hard for me to compare. Some of these new projects I think will let us compare that. And I've been told they're just making that even more generous than it used to be.
Thank you. We're gonna have to leave it there, but I really want to thank the 3 of you for helping. This has really been eye-opening, and my thanks to everybody who stuck with it. We had more than 50 people on this morning, again, in the middle of August. So appreciate that and the good questions. And we will share the video and the slides with everyone who registered and make that available. So again, thanks to all of you. Thanks to Cambridge Trust, NBC 10, and InSource Services for sponsoring this program. And everybody have a great day, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.